I met my girlfriend Veronica 7 months ago in a bar. We felt an instant connection and started dating 3 days later. She brought nothing but happiness, the perfect definition of a soulmate. So when I graduated from university, we both agreed to move in together. She's 2 years older than me, and she was already working, so I moved into her house. However, after moving in, everything went downhill. The first incident happened on the first night of moving in. Veronica works the night shift, so she was getting ready to head out. "Babe, I'm off to work now. Just to tell you again, the neighbors next door get a little cranky at night, so just ignore them," she said sweetly. Yeah, I get it," I responded. I gave her a kiss goodbye and she left, leaving me alone in her house. I sat down on the kitchen table and got to work. For context, I work remotely as a character designer for a video game company. It was peaceful for a few hours until the clock hit 2 a.m. The cranky neighbors began screaming profusely. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but it sounded like an intense argument. I tried ignoring it for a while, but eventually the sound became unbearable. Banging was heard on the walls, glass shattering on the floor, followed by more screaming and arguing. So much of it sounded like multiple voices overlapping each other. I tried blasting music in my headphones, but that didn't help. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore, so I called it a night and stopped working. The next day passed by in a flash. I chose not to tell Veronica about the neighbors since it was apparently normal. I didn't want her to think that it bothered me so much. It was her house after all. Nighttime came and I was watching TV on the sofa when the arguments from the neighbors came again. Thumping, glass shattering, furniture being thrown around. You think their house is a WWE ring? Jesus Christ, I muttered to myself. Suddenly, I started hearing banging on the door, followed by a blood-curdling scream. "What the fuck?" I said while pausing the movie I was watching. The neighbor was trying to break into the house. That's it. That was the last straw. I got up and went to the back door where the banging and screaming was being heard. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen table in case the man would break the door. Thank God it was locked. Just in case, I leaned against it, each punch crushing my back. My heart was racing. My hands were shaking. I didn't know what to do. For all I knew, the man could seriously hurt me. It felt like an eternity before what I'm assuming is a man stopped banging on the door. Concurrently, the screaming stopped and it was silent. "The fuck?" I muttered under my breath. There was no way I was going to live in these conditions. I decided I was going to confront Veronica about it when she got home. With that in mind, I made sure all the doors were locked, windows shut, and went to bed. A few hours later at 6 a.m., my girlfriend got home and laid down in the bed next to me. She hugged me from behind and gave me a kiss on the nape, waking me up. "How's everything?" she asked softly. "Were the neighbors loud?" I grunted and turned my head to face her, rubbing my eyes. "What?" Veronica giggled. "How did it go with the neighbors?" I found it strange that she asked me that today but not yesterday. Maybe it was me being tired. "The husband tried breaking in," I said. "He banged on the door for at least 2 minutes screaming. I thought that was the end for me." "Seriously, Veronica, I don't think this house is safe for us to live in." "As long as the door is locked, you should be fine," she smiled sweetly. I gave Veronica a serious look. "Listen, I can't live with these conditions." I tried to say it as nicely as possible. "I didn't even feel safe in this house last night." "You're telling me this is going to happen every single night?" Veronica looked down, her eyelids drooping down in discomfort. I felt sorry blaming her for something that wasn't her fault, but obviously we needed to do something about it. I couldn't fear for my life every single night. "I'll call the wife tonight and see if anything can be done." She hugged me tightly. "Okay." I smiled and kissed her forehead. "Thank you, baby. I know it's not your fault, but it's impossible to live in fear in my own house every night." On the following evening, Veronica left for her night shift. Once again, I was left alone in her house. She texted me around 15 minutes later, telling me that the problem was solved and that it should be better tonight. I thanked her and laid down on the sofa to wind down. I woke up a few hours later at 4 a.m. to screaming from the psychotic neighbors once again. Furious, I got out of bed and prepared myself for confrontation. I was ready to finally get to the bottom of this. However, as I walked closer to the front door, something felt off. I noticed the voices and banging a little closer than usual, as if they were in the same house. It was the first time I ever paid attention to where the sound was truly coming from, but it was still unexpected. Subtle, but unexpected. Following the traces of sound, the screams didn't take me to the front entrance or to the house next door. They took me to the basement door, the only part of the house I haven't gone into yet. My heart began racing. This has to be my hallucinations. The sounds can't be coming from my girlfriend's basement, right? With my legs trembling, I tried to push the basement door open, but it was locked. It only resulted in even louder screaming coming from downstairs. They sounded like a cry for help. "What the fuck is down there?" I muttered. The thought alone sent shivers down my spine. Thankfully, or unthankfully, my uncle taught me lockpicking when I was younger in case I was in a dangerous situation where I needed it. Thanks, Uncle Will. So if there has ever been an opportunity to use that skill, it would be now. I took 2 paper clips and started fidgeting them inside of the lock. In just a few minutes, the door unlocked, but it still wouldn't open. I looked around the house for anything I could use until I found a crowbar. Using all my might, I pushed the door open. Looking back, I wish I hadn't. Instantly, I heard loud, blood-curdling screams piercing my ears. Screams that you would only hear in horror movies. Covering my ears, I forced my way downstairs. What I saw was horrific. Dead bodies of dozens of guys were organized in a line on the floor across the basement. Worst of all, every guy there looked to be around my age, many looking like the exes Victoria had talked about in passing. Above them was a jar. Inside it looked to be their faces with a large glow surrounding them. They were screaming in absolute agonizing pain. From what I saw, it looked to be their souls, the sealed, trapped souls of innocent men facing endless pain in their afterlife. The stench was unbearable. Their bodies were bled out, as if everything inside these men were sucked out to leave only their pure skin. Despite that, their faces were somewhat recognizable, each body neatly placed to keep its original shape. Their names were written in blood in front of each body: Jack, Noah, Michael, etc. Their screams sounded more like loud gasps from up close. The room was so loud I was getting dizzy. The screams only got louder. It sounded loud enough to screech into my brain. My mind went blank, my body shaking at the thought that this was my girlfriend's creation. It got even worse when I got to the end. Another name written in blood, with no body behind it, as if it was still being prepared. Dylan. That was my name. Then I got a notification on my phone, a message from Veronica. My heart stopped just by reading it. "Hey babe, on my way home. Sorry about yesterday. Let's have some fun tonight." I sat alone in my dimly lit apartment, the shadows cast by the flickering streetlight outside dancing across the walls. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, its screen glowing with an incoming call. It was a number I didn't recognize, but curiosity got the better of me. I answered with a shaky, "Hello?" A raspy voice on the other end whispered, "You've been chosen." The call ended abruptly. I tried calling back, but the number was disconnected. My heart raced. This wasn't a prank. There was something sinister about the way the voice lingered in my mind. The next night, I was jolted awake by my phone buzzing again. The same number. I answered, but there was only silence. I hung up, my anxiety mounting. Sleep was elusive, my mind racing with the worst-case scenarios. Days passed, each night marked by the same eerie call. The voice never spoke again, but the calls became a consistent, unsettling presence in my life. I started noticing strange occurrences, objects out of place, whispers in the dark. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. One evening, as the phone buzzed yet again, I mustered the courage to confront whatever was tormenting me. I answered the call and heard nothing but static. I paced around the room, my paranoia escalating. Then I noticed something strange. My apartment was eerily quiet. The usual sounds of the city were gone. I checked the caller ID and saw something I hadn't noticed before, a small, faintly glowing text at the bottom of the screen. "It's time." Panic surged through me. I turned around, my breath catching in my throat as I saw a shadowy figure standing in the doorway. The figure stepped into the light, revealing a face that was eerily familiar. It was me, or rather, a grotesque, distorted version of me. My doppelganger's eyes were hollow, and its grin was unnervingly wide. As I backed away, the doppelganger spoke in that same raspy voice. "You were chosen to replace me." I stumbled backward, my mind racing. The doppelganger moved closer, and I could feel the icy chill of its presence. In a desperate bid to escape, I grabbed my phone and dialed the number again, hoping against hope that it would lead to some kind of resolution. This time, a voice answered, a calm, reassuring tone. "Congratulations, you've solved the puzzle." The doppelganger froze, its form flickering like a faulty projection. It disintegrated into shadows and the room returned to normal. The phone line went dead, and I was left alone in the silence of my apartment. I looked at the phone in my hand, now displaying a message. "Thank you for playing. You've won." I sat down, stunned, trying to piece together what had just happened. I'd been trapped in a twisted game, but somehow I had come out victorious. The calls had stopped, and the lingering terror had faded. With a deep breath, I realized the horror was over. The game was done, and I had survived. It was a cold winter night in New York City, and I was locked in my room reviewing a script for an audition I had the next morning for a theater play. As a budding actor, every job opportunity was crucial, and I needed to be prepared. I lived alone in a small apartment on the third floor of an old building in Harlem. The neighborhood was relatively quiet, but there were always stories about strange things happening at night. The distant hum of traffic and the occasional sirens were part of the usual background noise, but that night, something more sinister was about to unfold. I could hear the soft sound of my script's pages as I flipped through them, completely immersed in the words. Suddenly, an unexpected sound shattered the silence. It was the sound of heavy footsteps ascending the building stairs. At first, I didn't think much of it, assuming the neighbor was returning home late at night. But then, the footsteps stopped right in front of my door. sending a chill down my spine. Without thinking, I called out the name of a friend who sometimes dropped by unannounced. "Mike, is that you?" I asked, hoping for a familiar response, but all I heard was absolute silence. A wave of nervousness washed over me, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a neighbor passing by and I had just imagined it. However, as I approached the door, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed down the stairs, as if someone was fleeing in a rush. My heart started to race. I backed away from the door, now fully aware that whoever had been there wasn't my friend. Fear began to set in as I pondered what to do. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? That I heard someone running down the stairs. I decided that it was best to let it go and lock the door with every bolt. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the incident from my mind. I shared the story with some friends and family, but they all dismissed it, saying it was probably just a neighbor in a hurry. Yet the feeling that something was wrong never left me. I started hearing noises at night, faint taps, as if someone was trying to get in, but whenever I checked, no one was there. A week later, I decided to move to a new apartment. I found a place on the other side of the city and started packing. The night before my move, as I was finishing up, I heard the same sound of footsteps climbing the stairs. This time, the steps were slower, as if someone was deliberately approaching. The footsteps stopped right in front of my door again. This time, I didn't call out to anyone. I knew that whoever it was, they weren't welcome. I stayed silent, hoping the person would go away, but then something shocking happened. The front door, which I locked, started shaking violently, as if someone was trying to force their way in. I ran to the kitchen, grabbing the sharpest knife I could find. I was trembling, the terror gripping my body. The banging on the door grew more intense, and I felt like it could give way at any moment. Suddenly, everything stopped. The silence that followed was terrifying, almost worse than the noise. I stood still, my breath shaky. After a few minutes, I mustered up the courage to look through the peephole, but no one was there. The next day, I left the apartment in a hurry, not looking back. I moved to the new place and tried to forget what had happened, but the story didn't end there. Days later, I heard some disturbing news. A body had been found in the basement of my old building, wrapped in plastic bags. The victim was a woman who had been missing for weeks. The discovery made me question whether what I experienced that night was connected to the crime. Maybe the killer was using the building as a hideout. Maybe I had been watched by someone with malicious intent. I tried to push these thoughts away, but they kept haunting me. I knew if I had gone down the stairs that night, it could have been me instead of the woman. A few months passed, and I was starting to feel safe again, but one night, in the new apartment while I was laying in bed, I heard a familiar sound. Footsteps slowly making their way up the stairs. My fear returned at full force. Whomever or whatever it was, it seemed to have found my new address. The sound stopped right outside my door, just like before. I couldn't move, only waiting. Then, with a loud click, the apartment lights went out. Panic seized me, and I rushed to grab the knife again. But when I turned on the lights with my phone, I noticed something terrible. My door was open, as if someone had entered. I turned slowly, sweat dripping down my face. The darkness in the hallway seemed thicker than usual, and I felt that something or someone was there, watching me. Without a second thought, I bolted out of the building, running down the stairs as fast as I could. I never went back. I left New York, moving to a small town in the countryside, hoping to find peace. But what I didn't realize was that no matter where I went, the footsteps on the stairs would follow me, because for whatever was chasing me, the hunt wasn't over yet. Anna, can you room the next patient? I asked, glancing up from my notes. Sure, she'll be in room 5, she replied, heading down the hallway. I quickly reviewed the patient's history that Anna had written up. The lady had been complaining of a haze that seemed to come and go, and occasional stabbing pains in her left eye that began several days ago. Nothing way out of the ordinary, really. It was probably just a combination of floaters and dry eye. In my mind, the diagnosis was already locked and loaded. But just out of precaution, the patient was dilated to make sure there wasn't anything going on with her retina. Satisfied with my guess, I took off my readers, picked up my laptop, and entered room 5. Miss Myers, it's good to meet you. I'm Dr. Ronald. It's nice to meet you too, she replied, her voice tense. Miss Myers was a young lady, her hands clutching her handbag in the exam chair, her eyes hidden behind a pair of sunglasses far too large for her face. Sorry for the sunglasses, Doc. Since yesterday, my eyes have been really sensitive to light. Faint alarm bells started to ring in my head, but I pushed the thought aside for now. Oh no, it's no problem. Why don't you tell me a little more about what's going on with your eyes? I asked, trying to sound reassuring. Well, it's just my left eye, really. Since Saturday, I feel like my vision's been getting worse, like a fog's been building up, and I get these shooting pains from time to time. It almost feels like someone is poking my eye from the back. I had lunch with a friend on Friday who had similar symptoms at the time. I was wondering if it's a weird form of pink eye or something. Could be. How about let's take those sunglasses off and we'll get a look at what's going on with your eye. Oh, of course, she said, removing the oversized sunglasses. Under the slit lamp, her eyes seemed normal enough, with the exception of her left eye being somewhat bloodshot. With no clear explanation of her symptoms, I took out my fundus lens and peered into the back of her eye. I had caught no more than a glimpse at her retina before she shrieked and slapped the lens, knocking it rattling onto the floor. But even without that abrupt interruption, I would have dropped the lens in shock. In that brief, horrifying instant, I saw something that defied all logic. Her optic nerve was a pitch-black void, an abyss that seemed to swallow light itself. The optic nerve usually looks like a donut, with a dark orange outer ring surrounding a brighter inner circle. The inside of Miss Myers' optic nerve was pure darkness. A perfect little black circle, almost like a miniature black hole, had manifested in the back of her eye, absorbing all light passing into it. As my mind spun in a whirlwind of confusion, Miss Myers tumbled from her chair, collapsing onto the floor with a shriek that pierced the air. She clutched her hand over her eye, her voice raising in a crescendo of panic. Just then, Anna burst into the room, snapping me out of my stupor. We rushed to her side, dropping to our knees to help Miss Myers. She was inconsolable, moaning and rocking back and forth, her distress palpable. "Oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God," she wailed, her voice crackling with terror. "There's something moving in my eye!" As her screaming reached an unbearable climax, Miss Myers suddenly looked up from her prostrated position. Her hand was still cupped firmly over her eye, but now we could see the blood trickling down between her fingers, a crimson stream staining her pale cheek. My heart pounded in my chest, As I watched in horror, something was moving beneath her skin, forcing her fingers apart from the inside. The sight was grotesque, a nightmarish struggle playing out just beneath her flesh. With a final blood-curdling scream, Miss Myers collapsed to the floor, her body convulsing violently. Her arms fell limply to her side, revealing the true extent of the horror. Jet-black spider-like appendages erupted from her eye, each one glistening with a wet, otherworldly sheen. They waved and writhed, searching for a grip on the slick linoleum tiles. Each movement left behind bloody stretches on Miss Myers' face, the lines of red contrasting starkly with her ashen skin. The appendages moved with a life of their own, a ghastly spectacle of wriggling limbs that defied all logic and understanding. The room was filled with the sickening sound of their scraping against the floor, mingling with the faint gurgling moans that escaped Miss Myers' lips. The sight was more than I could bear, a vision straight from the depths of a fevered nightmare. Anna and I immediately fled the room, leaving Miss Myers' twitching body and ever-growing appendages writhing in a pool of blood on the floor. The next few hours were a disorienting blur. The police arrived, sealing off the clinic. Soon after, men in black suits took over, their presence cold and methodical. Anna and I were separated, each placed in stark white rooms and interrogated, forced to recount every harrowing detail of what we had witnessed. The questioning was relentless, and it felt as though we were trapped in a loop of terror, reliving the nightmare over and over. Finally, we were released, but only after signing hefty non-disclosure agreements. I'm writing this in the bathroom now. I know I signed an NDA, but someone needs to know. The idea of returning to work seems impossible. I think I'll take some time off, perhaps go fishing, or finally make a dent in the Netflix watch list I've been building up. But first, I need to take some Tylenol for this shooting headache behind my eyes. I've always loved the quiet of libraries, the way the air seemed to hum with a subdued reverence, how the dusty scent of old books wrapped around me like a comforting embrace. I used to hang out at my grandma's house when she was still alive and kicking. The place was a bit dusty, though Nana did try her best at dusting, and the old wooden furniture made the air smell ancient, as it should. Surely you know how the scent of my grandparents' house is, right? It was why I took the job at the city's oldest library. I grew up in that kind of rustic environment. I thought it would be a perfect place to escape, to lose myself in endless stacks of long-forgotten stories. But I never imagined I would stumble upon one of my own. It started with a simple accident. I was restocking the history section when my foot caught on something. Looking down, I saw the corner of an old leather-bound book peeking out from beneath a shelf. It was strange. This particular shelf was bolted to the floor, leaving no room for anything to slip underneath. Curious, I knelt and pulled the book free, the spine creaking with age. The title was embossed in gold, though the letters were faded and nearly illegible. It took a moment for me to decipher them. The Library of Echoes. I had never seen or heard of it before, which was odd given how well I knew the books that should be on this particular shelf. I turned it over, searching for a barcode or any sign it belonged to our library. There was none. Someone might have accidentally put this back, I thought to myself. Thus, I reported this to our manager to look into via our library system. Finished filling out the report, my curiosity got the better of me. A book as old as it looked would definitely contain some sort of vintage novel that would intrigue a geeky bookworm such as me. I giddily took the book to the back room, where I could examine it without interruption. The pages were brittle, yellowed with age, but the text was clear, crisp even, as though the ink had just dried. As I read the first few lines, a strange sensation came over me. The words were familiar, unsettlingly so. The book described a librarian, alone in a vast, ancient library, discovering a hidden book that seemed to have been waiting for them. My hands began to tremble as I continued reading, realizing that the book was describing me, right down to the smallest details of my day. The chair I was sitting in, the coffee I had spilled earlier in the break room, even the way my heart was beginning to race as I read further. I should have stopped, but I couldn't. The story continued, recounting how the librarian, overwhelmed by the impossible nature of the book, would return to the shelves in search of more, how they would find a hidden door, one they had never noticed before, leading to a forgotten section of the library, a place that shouldn't exist. I shut the book. Well, that was weird, I thought to myself after a good yawn, the kind of yawn that shuts you out from the world for a few seconds. As I'm the only person in this library on a Sunday, and I had a filling lunch earlier, I decided to take a nap. I made sure to look like I was reading a book, a skill I developed in middle school. I remember falling asleep quickly. In the dream, I felt a sudden terror as I saw myself in the middle of the same library. I don't remember standing up and walking away from my desk. Driven by a mix of fear and compulsion, I walked through the labyrinth of shelves until I saw it. The small, narrow door at the end of an aisle I knew had been empty, just waiting to be found as said in the book. The wood was ancient, the paint peeling, yet it called to me, pulling me forward with an irresistible force. I grasped the cold bronze handle and pushed it open. The air beyond was different, colder, heavier, thick with a scent of mildew or something else, something I couldn't quite place. The room was dimly lit by a single flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting long, shifting shadows across the walls. Shelves lined the room, filled with more books, each one seemingly older than the last. I picked up the first book that caught my eye. It was thick, bound in cracked leather, and as I opened it, I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. The words were in a language I couldn't understand, the letters twisting and contorting on the page as if they were alive. Then suddenly, the book's cover became as hot as the sun. I screamed in pain as I dropped the book, my charred hands shaking uncontrollably. But it was too late. The door behind me slammed shut, the echo reverberating through the room like a gunshot. I was trapped. Panic set in, but my body refused to move, held in place by some unseen force. The books on the shelves began to hum, a low guttural sound that resonated deep within my bones. I realized that the room itself was alive. The books were its organs, the shelves were its bones, and I was its prey. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and on it rested another book, identical to the one I had first found. My feet moved of their own accord, carrying me forward as the humming grew louder, more insistent. I didn't want to open it, but my hands betrayed me, reaching out to touch the worn cover. The moment my fingers brushed the leather, the humming stopped. Silence fell over the room like a shroud. I opened the book. It was blank. I flipped through the pages, each one as empty as the last, until I reached the very end. There, in spidery handwriting, was a single sentence. "You are the last echo." I felt a sharp pain in my chest, as if something had torn loose inside me. The room began to spin, the shadows closing in, pressing against me until I could barely breathe. And then, as quickly as it had begun, it stopped. I was standing in the main hall of the library, the hidden door nowhere to be seen. The book was gone, vanished from my hands. But I wasn't alone. People were moving through the aisles, but they didn't see me. I tried to speak, to call out, but no sound came. It was as if I didn't exist. I rushed to the nearest patron, waving my hands in front of their face. but they walked right through me as if I were a ghost. In a way, I suppose I was. As I stood there helpless, I heard it, the humming. It was faint at first, barely audible over the sounds of the library, but it grew louder until I could make out the words. You are the last echo. The truth hit me with a cold, sinking dread. I wasn't just in the library. I was a part of it now, another echo in its endless, twisting halls. My story, my life, had been absorbed just like all the others who came before me. And the library would continue to grow, to feed on the souls of those who wandered too far into its depths. I tried to leave, to escape, but no matter how far I ran, how many doors I opened, I always ended up in that same room with its flickering lights and endless shelves. The books, now filled with my words, my thoughts, mocked me from their places on the shelves. And every time I opened one, I found the same sentence staring back at me. You are the last echo. The moment I was about to read those exact words for the last time, a voice read it for me. It didn't sound human at all. It sounded like it was read in an infinitely large room, resonating every word. It was deafening. I felt my eardrums disintegrate. I could feel blood gush out of my ears down to my neck. This was the worst pain I felt in my entire life. Might even be the worst thing a human could feel before dying. I would never wish this excruciating pain upon anyone. Before I could feel the thick crimson blood drip down my chest, I woke up. I woke up with a start, my heart racing as the oppressive darkness of the library faded away. I was still in my chair, surrounded by stacks of old dusty books, my drool pooling in one area of my desk, and the late afternoon light streaming through the tall windows. I let out a shaky sigh, relieved that it had all just been a daydream, a twisted product of my overactive imagination. I glanced at the clock on the wall, noting that only a few minutes had passed since I had dozed off. I chuckled nervously at myself, rubbing my temples to dispel the lingering unease. The Library of Echoes wasn't real. It couldn't be. Just a product of my mind blending the musty atmosphere of this ancient building with the unsettling stories I'd been cataloging all day. But as I stood up to leave, something caught my eye. A book I didn't remember pulling from the shelf sat open on the desk in front of me. The pages were filled with names, hundreds of them, written in an elegant flowing script. I skimmed the list. My eyes widened as I saw the last name written at the bottom. It was mine. My breath hinched, and I quickly slammed the book shut, my hands trembling. I forced a mocking laugh, trying to convince myself that it was just another part of the dream that had blended into reality. Fuck you, library. Fuck you. I muttered as I laughed, trying to make light of the situation. But as I turned to leave the library, the shadows seemed to grow larger, the air colder, and I swear I heard faint whispers echoing through the aisles. You are the last echo. I hurried out, my footsteps echoing unnaturally loud in the empty space. As I reached the door, I glanced back one last time. Everything seemed normal, just an old library filled with dusty books. But as I stepped outside into the fading daylight, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, something that had followed me out of the dream and into the waking world. And when I looked at the windows, I could have sworn I saw a faint reflection of someone or something standing where I had just been.